All right, today we are digging into one of the most brilliant and honestly brutal military maneuvers that you've probably never even heard of. It comes from the Paraguayan War, and it's an absolute masterclass in how you can turn desperation, a little bit of genius, and the landscape itself into the ultimate weapon.
So, just imagine this for a second. Your army is on the run. You are completely outnumbered, and to make matters worse, you've just lost your most important fortress. I mean, defeat seems pretty much guaranteed, right? So what do you do? How do you flip the script and use the very ground under your feet to stop a much bigger enemy dead in its tracks?
To really get how this trap worked, we first need to understand the sheer desperation of the situation. We're in the year 1868, and for the Paraguayan army, things are looking incredibly grim.
Okay, so the massive fortress of Humaitá has just fallen. This is a huge blow. The Paraguayan leader, Francisco Solano López, is forced into this really costly retreat. They've lost, and I'm quoting here, great quantities of all classes of materials. And his army? At this point, it's mostly made up of young boys. They're hurting bad. And the Allied forces, that's Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, they're closing in for the kill. But, and this is a huge but, the Allies made a critical mistake. Their commander, General Caxias, was apparently so enthusiastic with his big win that he just got complacent. He didn't chase them down aggressively. He didn't even bother to send his powerful ironclad ships up the river to see what López was planning. And that overconfidence, it created the perfect opening for an absolutely incredible counter move.
So while the Allies are celebrating, López is out there looking for a miracle. And well, he didn't quite find one of those, but he found something even better. A new defensive position that his own engineer called infinitely superior.
López completely abandoned his old, vulnerable defensive line at the Tebicuary River. He set his sights on a new spot, the Pikysyry stream. Now, this wasn't just about digging some new trenches. No, this was a total shift in strategy. They weren't just building a defense, they were setting a massive geographic trap.
You see, the natural landscape here was just perfect for what López needed. The whole area south of the Pikysyry stream was this nightmare of dense forests and marshes. It created a natural bottleneck. The only way an army could get through was on this one single terrible road, funneling the enemy right where he wanted them. And the whole thing was anchored on the Paraguay River at a key spot called Angostura.
And this right here is the key to everything. The source material describes the surrounding terrain as absolutely impassable. What that means is the Allies couldn't just go around. They couldn't flank the Paraguayan line without this massive, almost impossible detour. They had no choice. They had to walk straight into the kill zone.
The real linchpin of this entire defense was Angostura. It had this very unique horseshoe-shaped riverbank. It was the only spot for miles where cannons could not only control the river and stop the Allied Navy, but could also turn and fire right into the side of any army attacking the trenches on land. It created this perfect, deadly, interlocking field of fire.
But you know, having a brilliant plan and actually pulling it off are two very different things. Building this fortress line was an almost superhuman effort, and it was done in the most hellish conditions you can possibly imagine.
The sources we have call the work painful and diabolical. It was constantly raining, which turned the entire area into this swampy mess of deep, sticky mud. And don't forget, the soldiers doing this back-breaking labor were, for the most part, just kids.
As if the natural swamp wasn't bad enough, Paraguayan engineers actually made it worse on purpose. They dammed the Pikysyry stream in two different places. This flooded the only road that led to their lines, burying it under more than 6 feet of water. They literally built their own moat.
It's honestly hard to even picture what this must have been like. The mud was so thick and deep that, according to one eyewitness, an 8-inch cannon, a massive piece of artillery, could have just completely disappeared into it. It was so sticky it made ropes as slippery as if they had been soaked, making it impossible for the men to even get a grip.
And the human cost of all this was just immense. The soldiers, who were working constantly barefoot in this hellscape, had their feet, quote, materially torn apart. They were literally sacrificing their bodies to turn the earth itself into a weapon.
But all of this construction took time. Time that López really didn't have. So to keep the overconfident Allies busy while his main force was digging in, he had to get clever. He turned to cunning deceptions and brutal, lightning-fast strikes.
To hide the fact that he was retreating from his old defensive line, López ordered this brilliant little trick. He had his men remove almost all the cannons, but they left the leather weather covers propped up in the empty spots.
So to the Allied ships on the river, it looked like a fully armed battery. A handful of guys with just 3 old cannons kept up a convincing show of force before they all slipped away in the middle of the night. Deception was good, but it wasn't enough. As the Allied vanguard finally started to move forward, López prepared a deadly surprise. He hid a small force of 200 cavalry and 100 infantry just past the deep stream, and then sent a few soldiers out to lure the Brazilians across.
And the trap was sprung perfectly. As the Brazilians were wading through the deep water, the hidden Paraguayan force just swarmed them. The result was a total catastrophe for the Allies. An entire Brazilian battalion was, and I'm quoting directly from the source here, completely annihilated. That bloody ambush was a huge success, and it bought López the last little bit of time he needed. The trap was now fully set. The trenches were dug, the cannons were in place, and that man-made moat was flooded and waiting.
So, the main Allied army finally arrives at the Pikysyry line. They send out scouts to probe the defenses. They're looking for any weakness, any way around, any path forward. But after several tries, they all came back with the same shocking assessment.
That's right. The superior, victorious Allied army came to this one stunning conclusion. The Paraguayan defensive line, the one built by boys in a swamp, was simply too strong to be attacked. They decided they weren't even going to try. And just like that, the great Allied war machine just ground to a halt. They were forced to make camp at a place called Palmas, where their entire army got hopelessly bogged down in the exact same kind of soul-crushing mud that the Paraguayans had just spent weeks mastering. The trap had worked to perfection.
Now, eventually the Pikysyry run was bypassed, but that's a whole other story for another day. What this incredible feat of engineering and sacrifice really shows us is the power of strategy over sheer strength. And it just leaves us with this fascinating question. In any conflict, when the very land itself is fighting against you, what does it really take to win?